Actually, let's start there. You kind of had your initial foray into politics, at least as far as we know. You ran in the Democratic primary in 2018.
Correct. So that was my first real campaign. I had a couple little skirmishes prior to that, as I've always been interested in getting out and doing something along those lines. But the first major one where I got some wide stream appeal, I guess you could say, mainstream appeal, would be 2018. I ran in the 2018 Democratic primary for the governor of the state of Kansas, and I ran a fairly progressive campaign. Looking back on it, I will say it was a little more middle of the road than I think I would. Current me says, "Wow, what was that guy doing?"
That's kind of the impression that I got. I was following that primary at the time, and it wasn't, everybody's. It seemed like all the candidates, their priorities were like not super well defined.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, I'm not even sure what was the main like issue that was discussed amongst the candidates. This was like 4 years ago now. But yeah, I didn't really. It wasn't clear to me at the time like what your priorities were or what you really wanted to do as governor.
Yeah.
But that also could just be my bad memory.
No, there's a little bit of that. I would say of all the candidates, I had probably the most defined, like singular positions, but not really a structured plan. And I think that came across real well, or unfortunately well, I should say, in that primary, because like when singular issues were present, for instance, you were asking what the most talked about issue was. Well, that in 18, that was expanding Medicaid, which seems that everybody, I think they just kind of forgot about it. But when I was asked about it, I was a supporter of universal health care back then.
Okay.
But without a real definition.
Okay.
And then when questioned about it, people ask, do you want like some kind of single payer or collect, and I was just like, that's actually a good question. But so, it was, like I said, I was moving into progressive territory in terms of like political theory, but wasn't quite where I needed to be. So then after that, I had made plans to run in 2020. Obviously, well, we lost in 2018, and we actually dropped out to endorse Carl Brewer. Mm-hmm. That was a good opportunity because he was kind of, and I'll say it out loud, he was kind of my ticket in, because he had offered me, to work in his campaign and to be considered for further things. And I thought, well, if I can just get in some form or capacity, then I can get things accomplished. So I had made plans to run in 2020 for, I think I was going to pursue a state level, I think state Senate maybe. But when the pandemic happened, I kind of put those plans on hold for good reason. I had a bout with COVID. It was not great.
Oh.
Yeah, not good at all. But moving on. We're moving into 2021. We're kind of examining, we're ready to run again. Me and people who support me started looking at what we could do to best impact the course of politics, right? And started looking at the U.S. Senate primary. Now, people like me don't usually run for the U.S. Senate. So I thought this is a great opportunity to, one, win. I do believe there's a path to victory. And two, really bring what I call leftist politics into really the mainstream. So we're talking a little farther to the left than what you would consider your normal progressive style politics.
That's what I like to hear.
In the course of that, I started looking, and I'm kind of going into a little bit why I reached out to you guys, started looking at what some of the failings were in your modern political space. And I was looking at a trend that's been growing of, how do I want to word this? There's a lot of independent third-party groups starting to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And one, I completely understand. It's very easy to get burned by the duopoly, as they say, and started thinking about what I can do to build both my campaign and give those guys something to at least, at the very least, root for. And I thought, well, what's something that no Democratic candidate ever does is reaches out to these third parties. There's no coalition building. They basically assume roll with it or get rolled over, in a common phrase. So that's when I thought, I was like, well, we do need some real leftist unity. And I do like what the Green Party stands for. And it's actually very solid platform. And and I got to thinking too, because I've met many independent, because focusing on independence was a big part of my campaign. And heard from many that if they could, they would join the Green Party. So I thought, well, let's reach out to the Greens and see if maybe we can collaborate, or at least, let you guys know that somebody here who at least has a pretty similar platform is running, and, go from there.
Right. And I appreciate that you reached out to us. There is, we can get into this right now. Are you familiar with what the ballot access laws are in Kansas and throughout the United States?
Yeah, they're in my words, they're designed to keep anybody out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know in Kansas, I think to be listed as a major party, you have to have is it 1 or 2% of the general electorate on a signature ballot? Is that correct? Or is it
so
1?
Actually, you have to get equal to 2% to become a minor party.
Oh, okay.
And there's a distinction between minor parties and major parties, and really the only difference is major parties get to have the state funded like primaries that we have in August, and the minor parties, they just basically nominate their own candidates by whatever process they have, which is usually like a convention.
Right. I was actually thinking about that just now as you were saying that. I was like, because the Libertarian Party nominates 2 guys to go to their general assembly, and then they pick a guy from there.
Mm-hmm.
Or woman,
I haven't been. I don't know what their exact process is, but basically they can do it however they choose. They just have to tell the Secretary of State who their candidates are by June 1st of the election year. That's really basic.
And then I know that there's a time constraint on the signatures.
Yeah.
Because in the course of, trying to run for governor in 2018, we looked at that running as an independent.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually kind of the same reason we're in the Democratic primary now.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to get on there when you can just pay a fee and then you're good to go.
Right. And do you know what the fee is? Because I'm actually not sure what it is.
It is for Democratic or Republican primaries. It is, you can do a signature ballot if you want to, and I think it's also 1% of your registered base, if I'm not mistaken. But to pay for filing fee, it's 1% of the office's salary for the year, plus like $35 service fee. Yeah, because you just walk in.
That's going to be less than what even a signature drive to get 5,000 signatures. That's going to be less than that. It costs, I think, really the lowest you can find, because if you're going to do a real signature drive, you have to have paid signature gatherers.
Right.
Most likely a combination of paid signature gatherers and some volunteers. But the cheapest you can probably find is like $5 per signature, and just do the math. If you're collecting 5,000 signatures, which you actually collect more than that for an independent campaign.
Yeah, I think I saw on your guys' website, your previous drive, I think you were floating around somewhere you needed 22,000 signatures.
Right. And that was for party recognition.
Yeah.
not for a single candidate, independent candidate, it's 5,000. But yeah,
Right.
a little over 21,000.
Yeah. For that, you need,
Within 180 days, 6 months.
yeah. And I've seen you guys are pushing a bill through the state legislature to loosen up those restrictions.
Yes, and it's the same bill that has been put forward multiple times, and it's the best we've ever done is we got a hearing on it in the House Elections Committee in 2019.
Okay.
That's the furthest we've ever gotten. It's very hard to get bills through the legislature as
Right.
well, because
I'm going to make a note of that right now, real quick. One of the objectives I had during this primary is to build a kind of like a working class slate of candidates, if possible. And I have a few people who are running for state level that have kind of popped up over the last month that have pretty similar platforms to me. They don't go nearly as far.
Okay.
With, in all honesty, at the advice of my field organizers, I as they say, took about 10% off the top just because, they believe in me, and they said, you might not talk about certain things just so you can win the primary. But anyways, and I would like, if I can, I'm going to suggest that to them, to add that to their platforms, because it's always been astounding to me. Let me just say this. For a party, and you know which one I'm talking about, that claims to represent democracy and often talks about how democracy is under attack, they sure do a lot to oppose the third parties that would otherwise be on their side.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Democratic Party sued to get the Green Party off the ballot in several states, in I think Wisconsin and Montana, I think it was. And a Democrat administration passed a bill in New York, which is probably the worst ballot access law in the country now. The Green Party in New York has to, I'd have to look it up. I think they have to collect like 45,000 signatures in a very short time span. I don't remember what it is. But yeah, that was Andrew Cuomo that did that.
Yeah. Now, and I'm the type of person that, I don't, rhetoric is always going to be a part of politics. I always try to look more at actions, and that guy is something else.
Yeah.
I guess we just forgot about the whole nursing home fiasco during the pandemic. So in politics, I feel like I'm a really different kind of candidate because I'm honest. Oh boy, now I'm gonna get fired up on Cuomo here. We can't do that. So yeah, but anyways, yeah, I'm gonna suggest that to them to see if maybe we can. And that's just something that I think that should be a thing anyways, because it's the same thing when Kansas passed, when the teenagers were running for governor as well. And they immediately passed a age restriction. Like, the voters are the ultimate decider.
Yeah.
I don't
plus, it was funny because they didn't even have any chance of like being elected governor. Like, they were like,
it was an interesting deal, and I think there might have been one that I think could have had a chance in the general style, but he probably wasn't going to get past the primary.
Was that the guy that ran in the Democratic primary?
Yeah.
I forget his name, but yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Jack Bergeson.
Oh, Jack Bergeson, yeah.
I do think in a general election, I think he would have had a really actually good chance. He's probably the only one, though. But I think it was funny.
I'm not so sure, honestly. I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
Laura Kelly had a lot of money.
Mhm.
She had a lot of funding. But
Yeah,
of
she
course,
came
I mean,
out with institutional funding.
Kobach Kobach had a terrible campaign. Like it was just, I mean, some of the things that were talked about after the election, I just remember there was kind of a sense that his campaign just was not well run at all.
No, and then he had if I'm not mistaken, during the campaign, he had a host of federal lawsuits of all kinds of regulations that, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been after too, because
Is that the Fish v. Kobach, the requiring proof of citizenship thing?
yeah,
Yeah.
because the federal judge made him take a class on law or something like
Oh
that.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
just and that's not even as bad. I'm an attorney. That's not even as bad as it sounds like. He just did a CLE, a continuing legal education course.
Yeah.
That's all it
No.
was. And lawyers have to do continuing legal education all the time.
Just
But
like
he
doctors have to
did not know what he was
and
doing.
stuff. Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, yeah, he did run a bad one, and he was also coming off of, he was running on Brownback's coattails, as they say, like a continuation of, and couple that with the massive unpopularity of Brownback, it just was a recipe for failure.
Well,
maybe. I kind of wonder though, because I like to play the hypothetical game. If that same scenario happened this year, how would that play out?
Which scenario?
Like if Kobach ran the same campaign in 22, how does that play out?
Well, he'd have a better chance, just with it being it's a midterm election after a Democratic president won the presidential election in 2020. You know, the Republicans, just on the trends of how American politics goes, the Republicans have an advantage, and they're probably going to win either the Senate or the House in the federal elections, if not both.
Correct. I agree, unless I win in Kansas. But we'll see how that goes. But
do you have you're up against somebody in the Democratic primary, aren't you?
Correct. So there's actually 4 people fully registered for the ballot.
Okay.
I'm not sure. There's a gentleman, I think he's from Wichita. I can't really find any info on him. So I don't know what's going on there, if it's just a small thing or if something's building up there that I'm not aware of, because to me, it's still anybody's race. We're actually, in terms of our campaign progress, we are now at a point where we're going to start really touring the state. We're scheduling events throughout. Like I said, I want to go back to one of the reasons I ran was the big one would be, big couple reasons would be, number one, I get tired of feeling like there's nobody that represents me. Like, you don't see a lot of working class guys, just step up and just speak their mind. I think I'm well versed. I can typically hold my own, stumble a little bit here and there, but it is what it is. That, and then just the lack of progress on any issues, anything at all. And so I examined the primary, looked at the slate, the candidates, and I'll get to the other 2 real quick. Saw there's really not really too much of a progressive or leftist presence. So I said I could fill that void. Did some examining, looked at some numbers, and thought, if I can get through the primary, I said, there's actually a really good shot I can win because I'm different. And I'm basing that off of a theme that I've talked to while talking to independent voters, because I did a little bit of groundwork before I launched. And the number one thing that I find they're looking for is somebody who they perceive as different.
Okay.
And I think that's what propelled Donald Trump to victory in 2016, even though it doesn't match the reality of a situation at all. But he was perceived as this outsider and somebody who was completely different from the political establishment. Like I said, whether the realities mirror that or not, that's a whole nother issue, I suppose, that we have to discuss. But so then I started looking at my policies, and then I said, well, that I base everything I do off of workers' rights. And I guess I was like, well, everybody's a worker. I was like, everybody wants better rights. I was like, let's grow it off that and see what we can do. And then I started adding policy positions and growing it and started writing everything down because, like you were saying before about the 2018 primary, one thing that drives me crazy is when politicians will not state their policy positions.
Yeah, drives me crazy too.
I don't want to know that you support, for instance, to me, it's a buzzword, I suppose. When you say I want more affordable access to healthcare, it's like, well, that doesn't mean anything.
Access.
But, yeah. What is it you want? Do you want to nationalize healthcare? Do you want to build, I'm just spitballing here, do you want to build publicly owned pharmaceutical companies to compete with privately owned pharmaceutical companies? Do you just want to nationalize the pharmaceutical companies? What is your actual plan? And actually, I don't think I've ever addressed pharmaceuticals in my policy platform, and I'm going to add something to that tonight. So anywho, back to the
you have
primary.
I mean, on universal rights for all Americans, universal health care, including family planning care.
Yes.
Universal housing. That's really important. That's a huge issue.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add, because I want to flesh these out, and I haven't really figured out a good way to do it yet. On that universal housing, one of the big ways to tackle that, aside from literally just housing people, is to create, I think there's two ways to do it. One would just be to transfer ownership directly. For instance, if you're renting, just be like, this is your house now, and then deal with the ramifications of that after the fact. The second way would be to build a set of housing or acquire a set of housing that's free from speculators, because that's a lot of what drives that barrier of entry to housing, is people scooping up houses and properties left and right. Because I think I read a statistic one time that was like 50% of all houses are owned by out-of-state investors.
Hedge funds.
Yeah, hedge funds. Actually, during this whole, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the GameStop fiasco of the stock market. One of the things that popped up through that ordeal, and it's still ongoing, is that BlackRock was acquiring houses at I think 80% above market value. Like they were just scooping up physical properties everywhere they could. So, and that's kind of the thing. I mean, like when I see that, and that's always been on my mind to fix that, because I do want to flesh those out. I might make it its own page on top of that.
You could get really wonky with that.
Yeah,
it is a question, how do you actually do it? It could be, I mean, the systems that we had in place that are kind of dated now, the housing through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, the Section 8, and there's all these different variations. There's public housing authority based housing, project based housing, choice voucher based, but all those places are managed so terribly.
Right.
And I see it in my job. There are property managers at these places that are super picky and finicky with their tenants, and they're just like assholes to their tenants. And they, a lot of the places are run down, and I mean, but it's like one option would be to just revitalize those programs, but but I don't know. It might be better to start over with something new. See, the problem is I don't know if just transferring ownership to people who need housing is the best thing to do, because then they're responsible for all the
Yeah,
taxes
and upkeep,
upkeep. Yeah, and and we're talking about people. There's so many people that have just been completely left behind. Elderly people, especially, who live on a fixed income, and all they're getting is Social Security,
mm-hmm.
and the amount that they get in Social Security is based on how much they paid into Social Security. Mm-hmm. Some people are only getting like $700 a month from Social Security. I think it's more common. I've seen around 1,000. Some people get like 2,500.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge problem. But I mean, a lot of these people who that's their income, they're not going to be able to pay,
right,
taxes on real estate taxes. They're not going to be able to make repairs on their properties. So
yeah, it's a tough one, because I also thought about that too. But then I always counter it with a public option of some kind of publicly owned building company that would renovate, just to renovate and make it more livable, things like that. A little bit of an idealist in that regard. The practicalities of it warrant their own challenges, but talking about, for instance, on that Social Security issue, one of the things that I want to see is a guaranteed retirement at a decent age and a decent income, just guaranteed. Okay. So almost like a UBI, but probably the most practical form would be the expansion of Social Security in a real way. I set my limits. Well, I guess my priority would be, I think everybody should be able to retire at $50,000 a year by the age of 50. And then from there on, if you continue working, that's you, have at it. And that affects none of the other. So that way people will be taken care of and they can enjoy some of the time of their life. Because I know way too many people that are going to be working till they're 75, if not later. And they're just not going to have time to enjoy anything. And I think that is wrong. I really do. With another one too, to add into that would be another category of people are people who live on disability.
Okay.
There's some massive adjustments that are needed in that program. Like, one of the things, I think they can't hold more than $200 in assets at the end of the month. They have to spend all their money.
Yeah, I've heard
something like that.
I've heard it's more like, what I've heard before is it's something like they can't have more than like $2,000 in their bank account.
$2,000.
It like at any time.
Yeah, there's maximum. If they cross the threshold, then they lose their access to the program or something like that.
Hey, my honey's a member of the Green Party. I am not, but I often listen in. But I know about the state of Kansas. So every state varies. So I have a small food bank, and one of the people on our food bank has a lot of mental health issues and has since as a child. He must have worked at one time, so he makes like $1,400 and some off of Social Security benefits, and he has a payee, which means somebody takes care of his pay for him. But I thought, looking at what I could see, that he could make $18,000. And so I'm like, yay, you can get your medication, you can get everything you need. You won't live great, but at least you're taken care of and your medicine will be paid for because you can go on Medicaid. And he can't go on Medicaid because he makes too much money.
State of Kansas.
In the state of Kansas, you can only make $494, and then you have to have what they call a spin down. So anything more than that you make, they have to take that. Yeah, it's kind of confusing. All have to go toward medical cost, and then you have to turn that in. And if you turn it in one time and you didn't spend down enough, then they take it away again. So, and they make it impossible because like he's not in assisted living because he couldn't afford that. So he often does without his medication and everything because he makes too much to be on Medicaid. And, so not unless what you're talking about is more like if people go into a care home, then they have to spend down, because I've been through that too, spend down to $2,000. And if they make a penny more than that, then they can't be on Medicaid in the state of Kansas.
Right.
So,
you're talking about Medicaid. There's a we were talking about Social Security, but there's a similar problem in multiple of these programs.
Yeah.
And there's just these weird these programs could just be simplified. And there's all this, like they're designed with, there's this worry we're giving people too much money. If they have too much money, well, we have to cut off the money. And it's like, well, we have the money. What's the new military budget again?
$816 billion, if I'm not mistaken. Could be 863. I know it starts with
how much?
It just came out.
The thing about it, is we could fix, this is one of my points I make somewhere on my website, is a lot of these problems are artificial. Like they are created and they could be fixed tomorrow obviously they would take time, but I like to say they could be fixed tomorrow. We could implement these reforms immediately and then start working on getting them implemented, but they don't. And it comes to like a certain, I don't know, I like to call it like a societal philosophy. And what I've called it, the revenge society. Like how dare you need Social Security? Mm-hmm. So then they punish you for needing it. Like it's outrageous to me. And it's like, I feel like that's kind of one of the things that I base a lot of my policies on too, is like, how do we just help everybody? Like who needs help? And like, I'm not afraid to list, other candidates will be like, that's too much stuff. You can't have that many policy priorities. It's like, everything needs work. Nothing's, as somebody once said in a very massive presidential primary, nothing will fundamentally change. It's like, that's accurate. Nothing has changed. Where are we from 40 years ago or 50 years ago, Ronald Reagan? Like, where are we now? What has gotten better? What's gotten worse? And why don't we act on any of it? It's outrageous to me. And I think one of the reasons that drew me to the Senate primary too was, as we have seen many, many times, one senator can just derail the way a bill can go. So I thought to myself, I was like, if I win that, and I could be wrong on how the Senate works, and, feel free to correct me. I'm open to correction. But I was like, let's say we put the Senate in a 50-50 position and I don't lend support to any bill that doesn't have my stamp of approval. Well, that bill doesn't get passed. We can stop a lot of these terrible things from coming through. And then they have to start coming to me. And then from there, we can work on building more candidates like myself. That's just kind of
you're talking about using leverage.
Yeah.
That this is what Joe Manchin does. This is what and Kristen Sinema has done. Mm-hmm. And this is what the more progressive Democrats in the House kind of tried to do and ultimately failed because too many of them gave in because there was the Build Back Better bill, which was the much better bill, had I can't remember all the things that were in it now. And then there was the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And the idea was, well, if you want to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill, then you have to pass that bill with it as well. And we're not going to vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Well, some of the progressive Democrats just went ahead and voted for the infrastructure bill without a guarantee that the Build Back Better bill was going to pass. Yeah. And they was just like, well, you just ended any chance of getting what you wanted.
Right. See, and I do look at that too. And I wonder if in the House, if a lot of it has to do with there's 435 representatives, I think, not including, well, that might be including
that's total.
Yeah. Anywho, because I was thinking DC and
members.
Puerto Rico and whatnot, because I know there's a few non-voting.
Oh yeah, but they're not voting members.
But I think, realistically looking at actual rhetoric and action, I think there's maybe really only 4 real progressives in Congress. They say
I'm just using the term generally.
Yeah. Right, because I know there was the whole force the vote thing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that situation at all.
I am.
Yeah, and I don't know if that would have necessarily netted anything out of it. I think it would have been worth trying.
Yeah.
But I don't know if the payoff would have been what people expect it to be. But that's kind of what I mean. I was just, to be the first leftist, and I openly call myself a leftist because a lot of people don't understand what that means. So they don't see much, but for the people who do know, then they know that I'm real. I'm real. I can't be bought. And I was like, people have always said, what would you do if you came into a lot of money from somebody? And I was like, cool, you still deserve a higher minimum wage. I don't, just going through my list, I've, none of these rights or policies have an impact on that, One promise I can say, as I've been thinking about, is I don't want lobbyists in my office. Mm-hmm. The only people I want writing bills for me are the ones that I hire to put it into legalese, as they say, to get what I want done. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's kind of just some of my own little political philosophy and why I think me getting in would be an excellent benefit to not only Kansas, but just the whole country. Because these are a lot of things that we just need everywhere.
What, if you were elected, what would your relationship be with the Democratic Party?
I would be one, but I would say it would be more of a professional deal. Because I think the whole point of getting any of this done would be to stand alone, to say, well, I would probably be registered one unless I register back to independent, because I was an independent for years before 2018. Mm-hmm. It would be one of those situations where even if they put forward a bill and I didn't like it, I'm blocking it, or I'm going to work against it. It has to come to where I am for me to support it.
Okay.
And I'm, one big thing too is it drives me crazy when they sneak amendments in about weird things that have nothing to do with the bill they're trying to pass. I don't know. I don't have any specific examples off the top of my head, but I think they call them riders. That drives me crazy. I hate that. I was like, if we're going to pass an infrastructure bill, it's going to be infrastructure. I don't want 19 other things in there that have nothing to do with infrastructure. Just a little personal preference to me there.